I was looking for a good intro for today's video, and I wrote one down. I thought it was the perfect intro, but as I was looking it over again, I realized that it may have been best if it was said last week instead. But I will say it anyway. Everything that makes college football the most unique sport in the world is back. The traditions, the upsets, the rivalries, the rowdy student sections, the fight songs, the inevitable controversies. I don't know what I'm missing, but it is all back. Now, last week may have been week 0, but it meant a lot to see college football back on TV again. To recap week 0, UNLV, Western Kentucky, Florida State, and North Carolina had scrimmages. Well, pretty much scrimmages. The Jim Mora era at UConn got off to a hot start as the Huskies went up 14-0 at the end of the first quarter, but the Utah State offense started to wake up and they outscored the Huskies 31-6 throughout the rest of the game. Illinois, Florida Atlantic, Vanderbilt had dominating wins, especially Vanderbilt, 63-10 against Hawaii after going down 7-0 really early on in that game. The return of Jerry Kill into coaching got spoiled by a Nevada 23-12 win, and I was personally waiting to see what Nevada would look like offensively, and I correctly anticipated we'd see Nevada be heavily reliant on the running game. And what was without a doubt the best game of the week? Nebraska and Northwestern in Dublin, Ireland. We saw the Nebraska offense get off to a fast start, but then it turned into a game of momentum shifts, and the momentum shift that decided the outcome of the game ultimately, Scott Frost called for an onside kick up 11, and the Nebraska offense went completely anemic after that, including Casey Thompson throwing 2 interceptions. Overall, an exciting game if you're a super fan of college football that didn't have a team in that matchup to root for. Week 0 overall was a nice appetizer for what's to come this weekend and as well as the rest of the season. And also, week 0, it personally made me appreciate the smaller schools. Watching college football for a week, or should I say a Saturday, where there's no Alabama or Ohio State or Clemson or Georgia or Oklahoma, all those major teams, where it's pretty much the smaller schools, group of 5 schools, it makes you appreciate those schools a lot more. It makes you appreciate college football for what it is, and it gives the smaller schools some recognition. But what a week 1 we are in for. Fantastic matchups highlighted by a top 5 showdown in the horseshoe between Notre Dame and Ohio State. Without further ado, let's get to the week 1 college football predictions, and we begin with the big matchup in the Big Ten, Penn State and Purdue on Thursday night, and what a way to start off week 1 of the college football season with this kind of matchup. What is there not to love about this matchup? You have 2 experienced quarterbacks in Sean Clifford and Aidan O'Connell, perhaps the 2 most experienced quarterbacks in the Big Ten Conference. Sean Clifford for Penn State has had his moments in his Penn State career under center. Some positive, some negative moments. But his 2021 season, he dealt with an injury throughout most of the season. For Purdue, Aidan O'Connell, he gained confidence after his 2021 season, which included leading the Boilermakers to an upset over Michigan State, who was, at that week, number 3 in the country. And this Purdue team, I think, has high upside this season. In fact, I said early on in the offseason, Purdue is either going to win the Big Ten West or they're going to go 6-6, 7-5, nothing in between. And Aidan O'Connell, I think he is potentially a Heisman Trophy finalist if Purdue manages to make the Big Ten championship game. In fact, I think if that is the case for Purdue. I feel like he will be a Heisman finalist. But Purdue is behind the 8 ball in this matchup, as in May, Milton Wright, their top receiver, was ruled academically ineligible for the 2022 season, and David Bell left for the NFL last season. So Purdue lost their top receiver from last year and their top receiver for this year already before this matchup even takes place. And Penn State, they went in the transfer portal and picked up Mitchell Tinsley out of Western Kentucky. Tinsley had over 1,400 yards receiving last season and 14 touchdowns. And Penn State also brought in Manny Diaz as their defensive coordinator. And Penn State had one of the best defenses in all of college football last season. So I expect Penn State to have at the very least, a top 10 defense in the country. If you would have asked me who was going to win this matchup right when last season ended, I would say Purdue would win this matchup. But with what's taken place in the offseason, now that you're asking me who's winning this matchup, I'd say Penn State wins this matchup. I get that it's a road game, and road games early on in the season, that can easily translate to upsets. I just think that even if Sean Clifford struggles in this game, worst case scenario, Penn State wins this game the same way they won the opener against Wisconsin last season. And that was being carried by their defense. But overall, this is going to be a great game. A battle between two teams that I felt like probably should have been in the preseason top 25 with all the potential they have this season. But I do think the Nittany Lions, they win this game. Moving on to Clemson and Georgia Tech on Labor Day night, the final game of Week 1 of the college football season. This is the game that wraps up Week 1. And I have interest in seeing how DJ Uiagalelei is going to look in this matchup. Dabo Swinney hyped him up in the offseason. He hyped him up at ACC Media Days, saying that he is their QB1 heading into the season. But I have interest in, if he is struggling early on in this season, maybe even in this game, if this game turns into the game we saw between these two last season, where Clemson only won by a score of 14-8, will Dabo Swinney put in Cade Klubnik? Because he's done something like this before, where Kelly Bryant was struggling in the early portion of the season, then he put in Trevor Lawrence, and the rest is history. They went on to win the national championship that year. So will he do something like that again? Now, despite Uiagalelei struggling in 2021, throwing more interceptions than touchdown passes, he did take over for Trevor Lawrence in a couple of games in 2020, recovering from you-know-what. And I'd say he did well, in fact, phenomenal, considering the circumstances. Now, Will Shipley carried Clemson in the matchup last year. So, if I'm Georgia Tech's defensive coordinator, with DJ struggling last season, and knowing that he struggled last season, I'm stacking the box on the majority of this game. You got to take Will Shipley out of the game. He is the one that carried Clemson against you last season. And if you force DJ to throw the football, considering his recent struggles, you like your chances at that point. So, is Clemson going to win this game? Absolutely. Do I think that Clemson will blow out Georgia Tech? To be honest, I don't think so. The odds makers have it as, I believe, a 21.5 point favorite. I'll be surprised if Clemson wins by 3 touchdowns. I think Georgia Tech is going to be able to make this a game, especially if they come out with the same mentality they had in the game last year. Worst case scenario, Clemson's defense prevails in this one. Clemson's defense carries the offense in this game. like it did last season, along with Will Shipley. So Clemson wins the game, but how many points will it be by is the real question. Moving on to Florida State and LSU on Sunday night, the Brian Kelly era in Baton Rouge begins, and I think we're in for a good one. Last week, Florida State, they had a scrimmage or a practice, whatever you want to call it, against Duquesne. Now, even though it was just Duquesne, I think that Florida State, they might have a small advantage over the Tigers. They had the opportunity to get that first game out of the way. They had the opportunity to learn a lot about themselves on Saturday, to learn what the offense is going to look like, learn about the defense a little bit. Even though this is a road game, if they can adapt to the crowd noise early on in the game, I think they have a chance to strike the upset. Jordan Travis, he looked pretty good at quarterback, even though this week we are going to find out how good he really can be this season. The running game for Florida State looked good as well last week. For LSU, Brian Kelly says that he's named a starting quarterback for the 2020 season, but he's not going to reveal it to the public. He said that he decided on the starting quarterback literally 48 hours ago because the quarterback battle has been that close between Jayden Daniels and Garrett Nussmeier. Miles Brennan was in the running for that until August 15th when he decided to retire from football. If I had to guess, I would say that Arizona State transfer Jayden Daniels will be QB1. And if that is the case, I think this game is going to simply come down to which quarterback makes a play in the fourth quarter. Because I think that Florida State and LSU, they're going to be pound for pound with each other throughout the entire game. I think this is going to be a very close one. I don't think one team is going to blow out the other. I would not be surprised if this game went into overtime and went down to the wire. But I will pick LSU to win this game because I just feel like Jayden Daniels has a bit more experience than Jordan Travis as far as moments of having to win games. So I think LSU, I think they win a surprisingly close one. I can't see Florida State getting blown out or vice versa. In fact, a lot of people thought that Florida State would get blown out by Notre Dame last season in the opener. But Florida State, they forced overtime on Notre Dame. And ultimately, they could have won that game, pull off the upset, pull out the first major upset of the college football season, but they fell short. So this is Mike Norvell's redemption against Brian Kelly. So perhaps a storyline going into that game. Just something to keep in mind. Moving on to Cincinnati and Arkansas. For the Cincinnati Bearcats, they lost a lot of key pieces from last year's college football playoff team, including quarterback Desmond Ridder. For Arkansas, they were one of those teams last year that flew under the radar, that overachieved. I think Arkansas's 2021 season is a demonstration that Sam Pittman has the Razorbacks program going in the right direction. And Arkansas, they are going to have one of the most experienced offensive lines in the entire country this season, which is a great luxury to have, especially in games that will be won in the trenches. Ultimately, this matchup is going to be a big indicator for both of these teams what their season is going to entail. For Cincinnati, it's what will this team look like just coming off of a college football playoff appearance where they lost so many big pieces to that college football playoff team. And for Arkansas, if they were to win this game, an early indicator that we could potentially see Arkansas once again have a good season. But both of these teams, I think, have the potential to be 10-win teams this season. Cincinnati especially because this is Cincinnati's toughest game of the season. But I'm going to go with Arkansas to win this matchup. Simply because I just like Arkansas's experience with their offensive line. Cincinnati, I just think, has lost way too many pieces from last year's college football playoff team. If this was a matchup that was in the middle of the season, last season, I would probably pick Cincinnati to win, but without those key players from last year, I just think this has a double-digit Arkansas win written all over it. Moving on to Utah and Florida in the swamp in prime time. Utah comes into this season ranked number 7. 2021, the Utes got off to a slow start. They started out the year 1-2, but then they make the quarterback change, put in Cameron Rising, and they get hot real quick, winning 9 out of their next 10 games, including winning the Pac-12 championship. And their season ended in the Rose Bowl on the losing end, but they took Ohio State down to the wire in that matchup. And the 2022 campaign starts off in Gainesville in prime time, where Florida brings in Billy Napier from Louisiana Lafayette, who is very disciplined. The last 3 seasons for Louisiana Lafayette: 11-3 in 2019, 2020, 10-1, 2021, 13-1. So Billy Napier is no slouch. I think Billy Napier is a disciplined coach. I think he's going to get the Gators in the right direction. And what better way to start out the Billy Napier era than potentially upsetting Utah? And if Florida pulls off the upset, that would be the first major upset of the college football season. As I've seen a lot of people make their college football playoff predictions, and I saw a lot of people put Utah in their playoff. So a loss here by Utah, I think that would completely decimate their college football playoff hopes. Even though the Pac-12 could potentially look a lot better this season with what USC did in the offseason and Oregon being fairly consistent, I just think a loss here by Utah would end their playoff hopes. Now, the weather in Gainesville calls for rain at game time. So this game could easily come down to which team runs the football the best. Utah returns Tavion Thomas, who last season ran for over 1,100 yards and scored 21 touchdowns. While Florida, they lost their leading rushers from last season, Dameon Pierce and Malik Davis, and their more mobile quarterback, Emory Jones, hit the transfer portal, transferred to Arizona State. So this is Anthony Richardson's team now, who is projected to be a first-round pick in April's NFL draft. So Utah may have the advantage in the running game, which, if it rains throughout the game, advantage Utah, as I do believe that they're the better running team. But if this game comes down to a battle in the trenches, I think advantage Florida. In fact, I'm going to call the upset here. I think Florida upsets Utah, and that is the first major upset of the college football season if it does indeed take place. I think essentially ending Utah's playoff hopes. Moving on to Oregon and Georgia, and what a storyline we have in this matchup. Not only does Georgia begin their title defense against Oregon, but Oregon head coach Dan Lanning begins his coaching career against Georgia, who just last season served as the defensive coordinator and outside linebackers coach. So Dan Lanning is a big reason for Georgia's historic defense last season. And he now takes over as the head coach for the Oregon Ducks, and he has not yet named a starting quarterback. And this is perhaps maybe trying to hide some information from Kirby Smart, but Kirby Smart came out and said he knows who the starting quarterback will be. It's down to Bo Nix and Ty Thompson. But he knows it's going to be Bo Nix. And I think it's going to be Bo Nix mainly because of his experience, especially against SEC competition. Now, Bo Nix doesn't have the best success on the road, but luckily for Bo Nix and the Ducks, this is a neutral site game. So, I do wonder if we are going to see Ty Thompson in this game for Oregon. I think it's possible that we might at some point. And I'm interested in seeing what Georgia is going to look like in this game, as Georgia lost a lot of key pieces from last year's national championship team, including a lot on defense. A lot of those key pieces from that historic defense from last season. And they also lost James Cook and Zamir White. But they do return Stetson Bennett at quarterback. But a big key for Oregon to pull off the upset, Bo Nix doesn't have the best success against Georgia in his career. He just doesn't. To give Oregon a chance in this one, the offensive line has to protect him, give him time to throw. As Oregon is returning all 5 starting offensive linemen from 2021. So that is a huge advantage, especially with Georgia losing a lot of defensive pieces from last season. And I do got to mention the irony of Bo Nix being under center for the same team that he won his first college football game against. Pretty interesting. But all in all, I do think that Georgia wins this matchup. But I'm interested in seeing by how much, though, because I think Oregon, if they can establish early momentum in this game, I think they got a chance. Because the line is, I believe, 17.5, 18.5. I want to see if Oregon keeps this game close. I think Georgia wins, but something tells me Oregon has got the potential to make this a fight. And finally, the game of the week, number 5 Notre Dame, number 2 Ohio State, a top 5 showdown in the horseshoe between 2 historic college football programs. And what a matchup we are in for. College football playoff implications already on the line, as the winner of this game is going to have a huge resume builder, a huge resume win for the College Football Playoff Committee in pleading their case as to why they deserve to be one of the 4 teams in the college football playoff. Notre Dame a few weeks ago named Tyler Bach the starting quarterback, and he got quite a bit of playing time in 2021. Brian Kelly left for LSU, but they promoted defensive coordinator Marcus Freeman to head coach, and I think that is a great hire for Notre Dame. In fact, I think that it was the right fit. And Notre Dame is using the underdog mentality for this matchup against the Buckeyes on Saturday night. As Notre Dame is a very significant underdog, despite being ranked the 5th best team in college football, they are more than a 2-touchdown underdog in this matchup. And part of that reason is because, well, Notre Dame may have success. They may have had success in the last few seasons, but when they play one of the big teams, when they play the Ohio States, the Georgias, the Alabamas, the Clemsons, they tend to get blown out. Notre Dame returns 12 starters from last season, including all 5 starting offensive linemen, which is a huge luxury for Notre Dame. Ohio State, they bring in former Oklahoma State defensive coordinator Jim Knowles to hopefully figure out the issues with Ohio State's defense. The big issue for the Buckeyes last year was the run defense, giving up 5 touchdowns to Hassan Haskins against Michigan last year in the game. The Buckeyes return quarterback C.J. Stroud, who I think is the favorite to win the Heisman Trophy. And I will say this right now, but Ohio State, they are my national champion pick. I just think Ohio State, they have the best complete team to give Alabama a run for their money. I know that Georgia is the defending champion, but I just feel like they lost too much from last year's championship team to repeat. Because if we look at what Ohio State returns, they return one of the best quarterbacks in college football. They return one of the best running backs in college football. They return Jackson Smith and Jigba, who is perhaps the best receiver in all of college football. So when you're as big of an underdog as Notre Dame is, the key early on is to establish momentum. Ohio State struggled with the run defense last season. So this is going to be a big test for Ohio State to see how improved the run defense is. But in the end, I do think Ohio State, they win this game. I really wonder if it's going to be by as much as they're thinking. I'm leaning towards Ohio State winning by more than 20, but I would not be surprised if this game came down to the wire. I know Notre Dame's history against the big-time teams, but I'm definitely picking Ohio State to win, as they are my pick to win the national championship. But we'll see what both teams look like. Because the winner of this game, as I said just a moment ago, whoever wins this game, they're going to have the best resume to start off the season. Each week, I'm going to end the video with a brand new segment called Who's on Upset Alert. And how it works is I list 3 teams each week that I think are on upset alert. Now, these are 3 teams that aren't affiliated with the weekly predictions. So week 1, my 3 teams on upset alert are Pittsburgh, Texas, and Iowa. Pittsburgh takes on West Virginia in the Backyard Brawl on Thursday night. Now, Pittsburgh lost Kenny Pickett. They lost Jordan Addison, who was one of the best receivers in all of college football, and they lost offensive coordinator Mark Whipple. Mark Whipple is now the offensive coordinator for Nebraska. West Virginia named J.T. Daniels the starting quarterback for the Mountaineers. And Pittsburgh's new quarterback is Kedon Slovis. And I think we're in for a good matchup. If this comes down to the battle of the trenches, both teams are returning their entire starting offensive line from last season. And this is going to be interesting to see really 2 quarterbacks get a redemption opportunity. I think West Virginia has a good chance of pulling off the upset. I would not be surprised if they did, which is why I have Pittsburgh on the list of who's an upset alert. Texas takes on Louisiana Monroe. And I know Texas is going to win this game, but I can't see them covering the spread. I believe right now it's set at about 39.5. I just can't see Texas winning by more than 40. I think Texas will get off to a slow start. And Texas is kind of in a dumpster fire situation right now, as Steve Sarkisian supposedly named Hudson Card the starting quarterback. But then the boosters came in and said, you better start Quinn Ewers. And now Quinn Ewers is the starting quarterback for the Longhorns, the Ohio State transfer. And it's time to see what he's made of. And I do think he will get off to a slow start, but I think he will show some slight improvements further on the game goes. Plus, don't forget, the Longhorns take on Alabama next week, so they could be looking ahead to that game, which is a big reason why I think they will start off slow with this game. They'll win the game, but I don't think they win by more than 40. And Iowa takes on South Dakota State. Now, Iowa is notorious for losing to FCS opponents. They lost to North Dakota State in the game-winning field goal back in 2016. I'd say Iowa's defense is going to come up big in this game, but a thing to be concerned about is Iowa's offense. I think Iowa's offense is going to struggle early on in the game. I think their defense is going to be big difference makers in this one. I think Iowa wins, but I think it could be close. Plus, they take on Iowa State in a rivalry game next week. Perhaps, like Texas, looking ahead to next week. And that will do it for the Week 1 college football predictions. Like, share, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, have a wonderful day.